Officials in Hong Kong are still waiting to learn if China's president will be in the former British territory later this week. Security is tight as Hong Kong approaches the 25th anniversary of its return to China. And officials in Beijing are not saying if President Xi Jinping will be there in person. He has not left mainland China since the start of the coronavirus pandemic more than 2 years ago. And joining us now is Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, great to see you as always. Let's talk a little bit more about these commemorations in Hong Kong. And do you think the president will be there in attendance?
I really don't know, Tracy. This is fascinating because Xi Jinping has been very allergic to travel. There are a lot of explanations for it. One of them is that he's just worried about his position at home and is concerned that he may not be allowed back into Beijing. So we will not know until the last moment.
And Gordon, on a different note, there are reports that the zero COVID policies in China, that they could last for possibly the next 5 years, and that would include mandatory mass COVID testing, that is, as well as travel restrictions. What do you make of this, Gordon?
The Communist Party is into control. And for 5 years, that would correspond to Xi Jinping's third term as General Secretary of the Communist Party. If he gets it. So I think that this is very much to be expected in the sense that the party is much more concerned and will go to draconian lengths to ensure that there are lockdowns of the Chinese people. There are a number of suggestions, Tracy, that the regime is doing this because it wants to keep people at home, wants to keep them off the streets, because there's extreme unhappiness in China, not only due to the COVID lockdowns, but due to other factors as well.
Yeah, speaking of COVID, the World Health Organization, as you know, now says there's needs to be a deeper probe into whether the coronavirus originated in the Wuhan lab. Now, this after the WHO dismissed that lab leak theory earlier in the pandemic. Your thoughts on that?
The WHO is just recognizing reality, that there is a substantial possibility that this disease was manufactured in a lab or at least escaped from a lab. And in the beginning, the WHO obviously rushed to judgment, and it did so because of political pressure from Beijing, which was evident to everybody. So I'm glad that they have finally come to a more realistic position. But of course, Beijing is not going to allow any independent investigation of the origin of this disease. And that should tell us something about the viability of the lab leak theory.
And as you know, also President Biden, other world leaders are at the G7 summit right now. And one of the topics discussed was raising $600 billion in private and public funds to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. What more can you tell us about this? And also, separately, talk to us a little bit about China's economy right now.
Well, China's economy right now is stagnant. It is, I think, contracting. And we should see some very poor numbers for the second quarter of this year if Beijing is going to be honest about it. We're seeing all sorts of symptoms of economic failure. And that has led the Chinese people to be extremely upset at Beijing because Beijing has always claimed credit for that. Now, on the Belt and Road Initiative and the G7's response to it, it's good that we're competing with China. But Belt and Road is by no means their most important challenge to the world. And in many places, such as in Pakistan and Sri Lanka, Belt and Road projects have become an albatross for the regime. And so even on its own, if we did nothing, I think that this would be a win for us because China's Belt and Road program is just not as fearsome as many people portray it to be.
And Gordon, we have probably less than a minute left, but I really want to talk to you about this. I know you recently wrote a piece on China's solar panels and why they pose a threat to the U.S. and others. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. On the 6th of this month, President Biden issued a 24-month waiver on the collection of solar panel tariffs. And basically, he stopped a Commerce Department investigation. This not only helped Chinese solar panel manufacturers, it helped Chinese manufacturers in general because a number of very large companies which were thinking of moving their supply chains off Chinese soil decided not to do that within hours of President Biden's announcement. This is a really big win for Chinese manufacturers and a big loss for ours.
Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it right there. So much more we could talk about. But Gordon, thank you as always for your time and analysis. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy.